Well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on the Experience Christian Church podcast. We're here with your host, me, Diane Karshner, and of course, with our fearless leader at Experience, Matt Silver. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
So great for you guys to join us. We've been going through this series called Toxic, which doesn't sound like something you do in church, right? So there's toxic words and toxic thoughts and toxic relationships and toxic things. So we're concentrating on that first one today, toxic words. And I'm sure that a lot of you can identify with words that you've heard that weren't so nice and kind of hurt you. And I bet if you're like me, you can actually remember words you said that weren't all that nice, that we'd like to take back. So today we're joined by Jeremiah Simmons, who is a trained counselor who has been working with Matt for a couple of years on and off. And he's going to be taking us through some of those things that we don't quite understand about how we think and how we absorb words or don't absorb words. So we're going to be diving into that today. So Matt, why don't I bounce it over to you, because you have a close relationship with Jeremiah and you can tell us a little bit more about that. All yours.
Yeah, sure. So Jeremiah was recommended by another pastor friend that he works really well with pastors and helps us unpack a lot of the mysteries of life, the deep spiritual questions. He's the guru, basically. Jeremiah, there's nothing you can't answer, right? Isn't that how it works?
I wish that would be great.
Yeah, we haven't figured that out.
Answer a question with a question, right?
That's what he does. Yeah, he'll like, well, what do you think? And it's just amazing what he does. He's a movie master. No, he's
been,
yeah. No, he's just been fantastic to work with and consistent, and it helps me to get to know myself more and the impact of some of the experiences in my life that I just haven't been able to figure out. I knew they had an impact, but he helps unpack that to understand that impact more and helps move forward. And one of the things I've found consistently meeting with Jeremiah is I like to see progress. And so I'll say, why am I stuck here? Why do we keep going back to this same conversation 3 months later as we did 3 months ago or 6 months ago? And he's just really helpful to, he's full of grace. He offers truth and has just been really benefit. He's greatly benefited from our relationship. So Jeremiah, you're awesome. Thanks for being here today to help us unpack how words influence us.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's such a great topic. I think when we're talking about figuring out how to love ourselves well and trying to figure out how God can love us and invite the Lord into our lives and to be healthy, I think it's a really big deal. I think when we think about words and the way we affirm or don't affirm ourselves, I think it's probably the biggest, if not one of the most biggest topics that I talk about the most with people. So it's a really big deal to be able to have some time unpacking it today. I think it's super beneficial.
I think thank you. I think we underestimate the power of words, and I think and the memory of those words. So before we started recording today, we talked a little bit about core beliefs and how they start as a young age and they stay with you for your lifetime, unless you really address the ones that are wrong for you. So could you just take us through that, where you develop the core beliefs and how we just manage them through our lifetime?
Yeah, I think it's a great place to start. I think all of us, whether we're tuned into it or not, have these kind of core areas of belief of who we are and the way we see ourselves and the way we then interact and then take that into the world. The tricky part of that, I think, is often the way we value ourselves. It's taught to us first by our caregivers, by our parents, and ultimately becomes those core beliefs that we are connected to. And they typically form before the age of 7. Most studies tell you that before the age of 7, your core beliefs, the way you see yourselves and the way you see the world, is already formatted. And these beliefs impact all kinds of behaviors that we have, conscious or unconscious behaviors. And the way I kind of think about it, it's kind of that hidden roadmap that directs our lives, no matter which way we go. So that thought of who am I tends to be a question that already has an answer in our minds and our hearts before we even get to the age to answer it for ourselves.
Wow.
So tuning into that can be a bit tricky. And I think it takes that pause to slow down and just start to ask yourself, so what is it that I really do believe about myself? How did mom and dad care for me, love me, and engage me in some of those ways? And it's an internalized, what we would call internalized truth about ourselves and the world that is already fixed. So tuning into that is huge. And I think it often, I think that's why it's so important. We're talking about toxic words. I think a lot of us, and again, never to blame our moms and dads, but I think the way our parents and the styles they parented and the ways that they impacted us tend to really shape a lot of the ways we see ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was just thinking, as you were saying that I have 4 grandkids, but 2 little granddaughters that are that age, and just thinking and looking at them and their personalities that have emerged over the last couple of years, that this is who they are going to believe they are as they get older. That's really powerful when you think about children and that age. I mean, they're fun and they're, you want to discipline, keep them safe and all that, but you're pouring words in them. And Matt, you just have 3 kids that came through this age. How does that impact you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I asked Quinn just now. I was on my way back from dropping Ian off at work, which sounds crazy to say. And I called Quinn. I was like, hey, what words do you remember me saying to you, both positively and negatively, that we can just discuss? Because I said, maybe I can share it in the podcast. And it was interesting. She just said, oh, Daddy, you just always say you love me and you care for me. And I said, is there anything that sticks out that I've said that hurts you? And he goes, yeah, but we've already talked about those before. And I was like, anything specific? She's like, no, not right now. So I know that there will be a day she'll remember words that did not come out correctly. And Carrie and I always joke that we are saving up for our children's counseling in the future from where we've inherently did it wrong. Even everything's attention to manage, even in an attempt to protect our kids, can give the implication that they're not strong enough to handle the world. And so, man, it's just our best will still result in some trauma. And that'll keep Jeremiah in business forever.
It's a point. I think it's a great point to make, though. It's the idea that even for all of us as parents, and even if we reflect on our parents, even if we do our best, right? We're sinful folks. We make mistakes. That even our best efforts fall short sometimes, and it leaves holes in our Swiss cheese, as I like to say. And the gift of that is we sort through it and bump into ownership of all this. I think first and foremost, it's not to put blame on anybody, mom or dad or anybody in the world. It's for us to be able to work on our self-awareness and kind of realize, our parents did the best that they could, and we can grieve that and sort through that. But the gift of it, I think, is empowers us with self-awareness then to figure out, okay, how do I love myself now and grow forth, knowing maybe I didn't get everything that I needed. Maybe I wasn't taught everything that I needed to be taught. But now I'm forced to, in some sense, figure out how to reconcile that, look at that, and do it and learn how to do it for myself.
So it's almost an acceptance of the core belief that may have been a little off. Yeah. So knowing maybe not even the reason that it was a little off, but that you realize, at the age of 35, that I've always believed that about myself, and just accepting that. I shared with you guys before that my mom, for whatever reason, decided to share with me at a young age. It may have been under the age of 7. I don't remember. I was just older when I recall it, that my sister got all the beauty in the family and I got the sense of humor, which was great if you were 16 and you looked in the mirror and go, well, at least I'm funny. And that it carried all the way through my life for a lot of the decisions I made. But I compensated for it, at least I think I was coping or compensating by being an accomplishment junkie. I was just so driven to be accepted and noticed for what I could do, even if I wasn't the most beautiful woman in the room. So let's talk, if you can, a little bit about how to figure out, you figure this core belief was wrong. So how do you compensate or cope with it or change it? How do you deal with it as you get older? These original core beliefs.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing. So I think once you kind of start to bump into that and kind of realize some of those pain points and some of those ways, I maybe needed something more, awareness of what you didn't get. I think it's the way I think about parenting as a whole, and the way we've been talking about. I think for all of us, when we think about our own experiences as being children, and then some of us that have kids, our own experience of being parents. I think the analogy I always like to use is we kind of hopefully are stocking our cupboards for our kids, that they'll have everything they need to kind of go out with their life and have all their resources, And I think for all of us, like we've described, I think as we get to adulthood, we kind of realize, there's some ingredients missing, right? That we got to go to the source ourselves. So it's the way I call parenting self, or self-parenting. And it's that idea of we have to be able to realize our parents did the best that they could for the most part, but what's lacking, we have to, in some sense, treat ourselves like our own children. We have to kind of realize, now I'm mine to care for. I'm mine to be able to offer all these kind, loving things to be able to give for myself, and to be able to offer ourselves love, encouragement, care.
Mhm.
And that's, it's not necessarily easy to take care of ourselves in that way. I think some of us don't always kind of, I think it's for most of us, it's easier to kind of take that and care for others and not necessarily tune that in and figure out how to care for ourselves and tune into what we need. So I
Yeah.
think the idea of trying to see ourselves in that same way, it's up to, we're the first person that we need to care for in those ways.
Yeah, there was we did a toxic thoughts message a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that Matt taught us was to mind our own minds, to take those thoughts captive. And I think that's the same thing you just talked about putting some things in the cupboard, and if the right things aren't in the cupboard, then figuring out what we as an adult have to put in there to fix that empty cupboard. That's really great. I'm gonna carry that cupboard thought with me a lot. Maybe I'll overstuff the cupboard somewhere, so I have to be careful. Okay.
One of the things I'll
go ahead.
add that uh, Jeremiah has just really reinforced is that it's important to actually say those words to yourself and parent the way you would want to be parented, even if it's, and for me, a lot of times it's not even parenting the way I think I deserve to be parented, because I parent my own children differently than I talk to myself and I parent myself. And so he's been really helpful of asking me, what kinds of things am I saying to myself, and helping me reframe that into a more positive light. It's so that high idea of minding your mind, minding what's happening in your mind, it's just so critical. And it's so unnatural in some regards. Like, we're used to just accepting whatever thought comes into our head as truth. Like, oh, I was terrible at that. Well, if we actually think about how would we define terrible in that situation? And is that a gross exaggeration? And would we tell someone else that they did terrible if they did those things? And so it's really been a good, hard process. My friend, after a good counseling session, he goes, I need donuts. Because it's work. It's work.
I think bringing that conscious, right, to be able to kind of tune into some of that, what is the record that's playing that I'm not always aware of? I think sometimes it can be some pretty toxic words. It can be some hard things, some hard standards we hold ourselves to. Yeah.
Yeah. So Matt, when you're talking to yourself, are you listening to, and I'll have to ask both of you this, when we listen to those thoughts in our head, are we rewriting them, or are we saying, no, that's wrong, kind of having a chat with ourselves, or does it depend on the person? I mean, how do you take these thoughts captive, these negative words captive, and get rid of them or change? I mean, what is the process here? Something practical that the listeners can hang on to and say, okay, I'm going to go do those two things when I say I'm not worth it.
Yeah, I'll take the first go, and then you can correct me, Jeremiah. What I find is I have to reframe them out loud, and then I look at God's word as truth. And so I'm going to look at a text or a thought or a message that God said, because I love the verse you referenced twice. It's take every thought captive, knowing that it's trying to take us captive. Like, we could be captivated by our own thoughts and held down by that thinking. And so the idea of this isn't natural. We have to actually go and take our thoughts captive. So for me, it has to be involving a rephrasing. And it's, what would Jesus say about the comment I said to myself? And knowing that I have inherent worth as a child of God. I'm a child of the King. You've maybe heard someone say that. Other people, it's just kind of weird language, but it is. If you're a child of the King, it has inherited rights that we don't have on our own. And so my position in Christ helps define my worldview of how I see myself, how I think I should be treated. Also recognizing that I have flaws and I will be imperfect. So it's really this dance to accept grace and a reminder that I do not have to be perfect in my position with Christ. I celebrate what God has done for me versus my own actions, and always reframing some of those natural things and just calling them to task.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. I think that's huge. Making that practical and making that your own, I think is the dance we're all in, trying to figure out how to do that
Yeah.
well. And it looks a little bit different for all of us, but I think the need is paramount, and it's something that we all need. And I think that's, like you said, Matt, verbalizing it, making it real, not just kind of just ignoring it, and say, okay, I'm just going to forget that and tossing away. I think actually actively having a rebuttal, having some firm handholds when it comes to words of affirmation to grab a hold of are huge. And you've heard me say this before. I think Jesus needed those words too. As I've talked about earlier, and then Matthew 3, as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water, and at that moment, heaven was open up, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." And I think it's those son, love, well pleased, being able to really firmly grab a hold of those. Jesus needed to hear that from God. And I think we need those words. We need to bathe in those words frequently. And I think that's the hope, the big picture hope that I think for all of us, that ultimately for all of us, that we would want to give our children, that our parents would want to give us. And sometimes other things sneak in there, and sometimes we don't always stay a hold of it. I think you've heard me say this before. There's kind of, to make it real practical, right? How do we do it? If I was to say, for anybody out there listening, what are some ways you can rally behind that? I think there's three things, Matt, you've heard me ramble about this before, but I think there's three things that we need from infancy for the rest of our lives in all the different ages and stages. And it looks different with every age and stage, but we need to feel safe, we need to feel loved, and we need to feel capable. And I think to the degree that we do or don't get those three needs met, we tend to cope. We tend to find different ways to try to get those needs met that often can be unhealthy. So I think even sitting with those three phrases and to
Yeah.
see how it feels, and to see what, can you receive that from God? Can you feel that? Can you claim that for yourself, that I'm safe, I'm lovable, and I'm enough? I think you'll start to see, if you feel a little bit of a tug on the other side of the street, that's the work that's right in front of you. So there's your work to do,
Yeah.
that degree. And I'm thinking, if you think about any kind of, if you learn anything and kind of do any kind of courses on like child psychology, you can kind of see from infancy to the degree the child, from 0 to 3 feels secure, he's taken care of in that sense, and they feel loved, they've been loved well, they'll healthily kind of go out and be capable. They'll go explore the room around them, they'll touch things, they'll leave mom and dad and go explore around them. And to the degree that they don't have that healthy attachment, they don't necessarily go feel capable. So it's happening, all this stuff is happening before we even talk, before we even are aware of thoughts or even memories. So all this stuff is within us, right? And I think that story has been a story that we've all been being told in our family systems before we even are aware. So I
Yeah.
think that's why it's so crucial for all of us to try to get out in front of that and realize, okay, so I still need to be loved. I still need to be safe, and I still need to be strong and capable. And I need to center on that and offer that to myself and provide that, realize God's providing that for me, and then try to claim that in and of myself for myself.
Yeah. Well, that is powerful. The one word that Matt used was the word perfect. And I think that's where I stumble. I stumble over the capable part, the worthy part, that I'm not perfect, so therefore I am not. So talk to us a little bit about that whole idea of perfection, and, in the social media world that we live in today, that's constantly negatively reinforced all over us. Talk to us a little bit about those words and that capable area.
Sure. Yeah, Matt, I would love your thoughts on that too, and how you experience that. But I think perfection and feeling like you have to get it right first is often a real detriment to any goals we have.
Yeah.
Because I think in some sense we feel like we have to be at that place of arrival. We have to be getting it right first before we can claim it. And
Yeah.
I think that's a backwards way of doing life in some sense. That's a backwards way of achieving anything, to feel like you have to be perfect before you can begin. And I think about anything we do in life. If you learn how to hit a tennis ball or play a musical instrument, if we felt that pressure to be perfect before we would start, how could any of us accomplish anything?
Yeah.
So I think it can often be, I think switching that, even I think some of the language we use to talk to each other, it's like, practice makes perfect. And I think how much more freedom we would feel if we were just allowed to be on the journey and to focus on progress rather than perfection. And I think
Yeah.
that's the goal, I think, for so many things in life, of realizing, there's always, the journey and getting better and growing, and letting that be something that can be our focus rather than perfection, because I think perfection always comes with pressure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I really can't help but wonder how, this modern society and our timelines has to be different than an agrarian culture where there was no instantaneous. And, you're so aware environmentally that a seed takes time to grow to produce a crop. And now we have microwave culture. Everything on our social media says in 3 weeks, in 6 weeks, before and after photos. Everything is just so much. I'll never look like that if I don't apply this, or I'll never speak that way or do that. But the whole idea of we can still become, and we are becoming, and a new life in Christ is possible. All of these, that whole remade in God's image, it's just beautiful language that's not superfluous. Like, we literally can be a new creation, and that's not an instantaneous. I love your progress versus perfection. And we use this in our becoming more like Jesus. It was the whole idea of training versus trying hard. Whenever I try really hard and I can't get the result as fast as I want, I'm just like, I'd rather be doing something else. And so it's interesting.
Yeah, I think even you can study, whether that be anytime we feel that pressure to perform and get it perfect, it almost always limits us. I think about my own experiences as an athlete in high school and stuff. I think I've told you that before, man. I was such a head case in tennis because I would feel so much pressure to have to hit the ball in to get it right, that I would end up getting down really big the first bit of every match, to players that weren't necessarily as gifted as I was. I didn't have the talent that I had per se. But I would end up losing a lot of matches because I'd be so in my head because I felt such pressure to get it right. And then usually when I would go down big, the pressure would be off. It's like, well, I'm going to lose anyway. And then I would actually play better. So it's so fascinating. If you can take the pressure out of it and just relax, how much easier life, just that idea of progress, to show up, be present. We don't have to be perfect. Jesus was perfect for us.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about that. We can be present. We can focus on progress. Yeah. The freedom that comes with that is profound. Yeah.
That's interesting. You brought up tennis because one of the very first psychology books that I ever read was called The Inner Game of Tennis. Came out years and years ago, but it was about that exact thing, about what you're thinking in your head and the pressure you put on yourself to get that first serve in really hard, so you didn't have to do a second serve, was overwhelming. And that's what I played tennis. That's why I picked up the book in high school, and that's what I struggled with. If I didn't get that first one in, that means my next one's going to lop over and they're going to slam it at me. And the pressure was overwhelming sometimes. I get you. So that's a really good analogy for life. Is there in your practice, have you seen a lot of clients who struggle in certain times of their life with accepting words that weren't good for them, whether it be in depression or anxiety levels? If they had just had sad things happen to them, are there times that we should be wary of when words are coming in that we can just go, all right, not now. I'm not listening to it now. Are there ways that we can be looking at those signs and times in our life?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime I think there's stressful moments that are happening in our lives, or in our relationships, in our vocation, in our world, and gosh, we think about the past year that everybody's kind of been going through stressful season. I think all the volume's been turned up on all of that profoundly for all of us, right? And I think it's made us all a little bit more open, unfortunately, to some of those things. And I think it kind of creates a bit of a vicious cycle, right? Because I think to the degree that some of those things externally are happening and we're digesting them internally with some of that negative self-talk that we're talking about, I think it creates this feedback loop that doesn't serve us, right? And it ultimately doesn't serve others. So yeah, I think you're right. Stressors across the board will heighten that. So I think that's why I think for all of us, that's unique to our own individuality about when and how those things do get stirred. But being able to turn our mind's eye inward and in some sense daily curate that ability to say, I'm going to wake up every day and affirm myself. I'm going to end every day caring for myself in that way. I'm going to give myself those words that I need to hear. I'm going to receive those for myself first. I think that's incredibly powerful. So the best way to kind of break the cycle is to get out in front of it, to be determined on the daily to care for yourself in that way. And that doesn't necessarily, hey, we're all busy. That doesn't necessarily mean you have 2 hours to sit over a cup of coffee and do that kind of self-care. Maybe it's, maybe it's the post-it note on the bathroom mirror that you remind yourself, as you brush your teeth in the morning and night, who you are in that way. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a laborious practice, but I do think for it to be a regular practice really matters.
Yeah. So it covers over all those times that something might sneak up on you. Yeah, it's good advice. Matt?
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the key verses that we're referring to in this whole entire series is Proverbs 18:21. The tongue has the power of life and death. And I'm thinking about whether it's parental children, they're in a home where parents are continuing to use toxic language, or a spousal relationship where one continues to be the victim of a death spiral of words, and they're on the receiving end, trying to make it work. Maybe it's even, I'm trying to do better. What would you say to the person who's coming to you for counseling, who is in the active space of using those words? I think of parents who use sarcasm a lot. And, you said it's really important that people feel safe, loved, and capable. One of the things to strip someone of feeling capable is using sarcasm.
Yeah.
It's when you're trying to have fun, buddy up with your kids, but you realize, like, wow. And I keep saying great shot when they're shooting basketball. This isn't working out too well. So if you're someone who's trying, I guess I would make it two things. One, if you're someone who is trying to use better words towards someone else, what advice would you give them about how to navigate that with a child or a spouse where you really truly want to make your words better, but you've had a history of throwing daggers?
Yeah, I think the best thing for all of us to be able to do is realizing it, kind of what we just talked about. You're not going to get it perfect. All of us, hurt each other. We say things we don't mean. We step on each other's toes in the dance. And I think there can be permission for that to be not necessarily accepted, but okay, in the sense that can be something we can own and grow from. So I think it's being able to, I think first and foremost, take that ownership over it and go to the people that we love to say, hey, I know I don't always get it right, and I want to work on that. So inviting them into the process of saying, hey, if I'm sarcastic, if I say things out of anger, if I hurt you, if I misspeak, or if I'm just, if I'm stressed and living out of a negative place, I offer you that ability to call me on that, to invite me to more, to invite me to that further place of who I really am in that. So I think that permission for our kids, for our spouses, for our friends, to really be able to kind of, in a loving way, hopefully call us on that, and to say like, ow, that kind of hurt, or ooh, that didn't feel good. That can be really helpful, because sometimes like for all of us, we get stuck in a pattern where, it's kind of coming out of us before we even realize it. So I think if any of us are aware of that, I think the best thing we can do is to go to those people and invite them to speak into it. I think that's huge. And I think the best thing then you could probably do then, ironically enough, is to realize kind of what we just talked about before. I think how we love ourselves is how we end up loving other people. So I think it is ironic as it sounds, it's the inverse of love your neighbor as you love yourself. It's love yourself as you love your neighbor. So you probably need to do some inner work and really kind of work on what does it look like for me to actually realize that's probably kind of a place of where I can be hard on myself in that same way. So how do you maybe get active in some of your own healing in that way of being able to sit with and kind of realize, where's that coming from in me? How do I then kind of heal there first and love myself in those ways?
Right.
Yeah. I always appreciated that whole adage, hurting people hurt people. And so it's sometimes just a great telltale that something toxic is going in you. If you're just becoming short and snippy with other people, you're like, what is really going on in me that's causing this to spill out? And, there was that great theological movie, Big Daddy, where I was walking through the park and he goes, it's not me, it's your dad. He goes, it is my dad. He starts crying. But it is so true that stuff comes out somewhere, some way. And then, so the second question is, what if you're on the receiving end of someone who really isn't mindful of their words and isn't interested in changing? And so you're finding yourself in that space. How can they deal with not just their internal voices, but literally external voices are continuing to give them a negative narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think that can be even a harder place depending on the person, right? So, I think realizing first and foremost, I think sometimes it's having boundaries and kind of knowing when and how to set those boundaries to not necessarily be subjected to that continually. So sometimes that is being able to pause or walk away in the moment, or even for large chunks of time from the relationship if it does feel like it's unhealthy in those ways. So I think in some sense, sitting under that long term can't necessarily be good for any of us, even for that other person. But I think if it's what we're talking about in the sense of, the people that we love that are in a stressful season as well, that says things that maybe they don't necessarily always mean, I think it's trying to offer them that same grace back of saying, hey, I maybe you don't mean that, but that really hurts. It's mirroring back to them that same ability to say, that doesn't feel good, that hurts. That comes from a place of, again, that healthy boundary of maybe helping them start to slow down and realize, maybe that is something I need to evaluate as well. Boundaries can be hard in family systems and friendships, but I do think it's offering that person grace by offering that back to them and trying to realize again that those people, that they don't get the chance to define us unless we let them. I think those hurtful words hopefully are coming out of a place where that person just kind of loses their tongue in the moment, so to speak. But I think kind of realizing, that's not necessarily truth that they're offering us. That's just that's hurt coming from a hurt place.
I really think that's a lot of bravery to be able to say that hurt, because a lot of our defaults is to act like it doesn't. And it just really leads to that. We've been dealing with some of that. Teenagers in video games. I don't want to be the old man that says all these teenagers in these video games.
Sure.
I had put online, I had read a couple comments, what's the worst thing you heard during an online game? And it's beyond toxic, like wouldn't even paraphrase what I read are being said constantly in an online platform when you're running high on emotion, you're playing a shooter game, or you're playing a sports game, and then fellow teammates, if you don't perform well, the things that are shared, and there's really no consequence. It's an unfiltered environment where they can just let it fly. And that, of course, seeps out into the kids here. It's scaled back significantly from what I read, but just innocent things can just cause that. And so we've just sat down as a family and say, let's gonna wind the sarcasm back really far. We don't want to be I know it may be a better rule to have no sarcasm at all, but we do like a playful banter. I always think playfulness is a safe space, right? So that how the saying goes, if you can joke around with someone and they aren't being hurt, they feel safe and secure and know that you're joking. When you're questioning that, that's really troubled waters, and you can tell when it hurts, and you have to be willing to say, hey, that hurts. And then of course the first response is, oh, come on, I was just joking. And then you actually have to say, no, that is crossed the line and that actually hurt. And that's a hard conversation. Boy, is it worth it.
Yeah, I was just, we were just had our granddaughters for the weekend, and we were playing wiffle ball out back with them. The 9-year-old who was very athletic already. She was just having the hardest time hitting my husband's pitching, only because he was way inside, but I won't go there. And I was doing the smack talk that, athletes do. She can't hit it anyway. Come on, keep it inside. Well, she ended up in tears. And I just didn't even think, because at first she was laughing, and then the smack talk just got to her. So I talked her through it, and I apologized. And I said, I was just teasing you because you know what? I didn't want, because she kept hitting it right at me, and I got hit in the face one time. And, so it was almost a protective thing. Like, she can't hit it. I hope she doesn't hit it. So I explained that to her. She said, I didn't think you would say something that mean, Graham. So I figured you were trying to get me not to hit, so I wouldn't hurt you. So it came around and it was fine. But it is interesting that words can do that, even though she knows I love her, I adore her. I'll let her stay up to midnight when she comes and eat all the chocolate she wants. But
which could be why she was crying.
It could be why they left in tears, because I didn't give them any sleep and all the chocolate they wanted. So yeah, one of the things you said, they don't define us unless we let them. I think that's such a powerful thing, that we own how we're reacting to what is said to us. I think that's really so powerful, because it's something that we taught our kids as they were growing up. that, you know, the sticks and stones going to break your bones, and, you know, words will never hurt you. Well, we always taught them that words can hurt, and that if somebody says something to you going to hurt you, you have to decide, are you going to accept it or not? So talk a little bit about, you know, in our world today, where we're judged so dramatically if we don't hit some standard, how we can not let the world define us with the words that they say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good. I think it's kind of like you described pretty well there, Diana. You know, I think it's you can be impacted by words, by ideas, by people. They can hurt, but I think it's the difference between having them hurt, you know, but also it's the difference between having them hurt and having them define. And I think it's that difference of identity. So your identity, who you are in your own eyes. I think it's the most important decision that you make on a daily basis. You know, and I think about, if you can start thinking about who you are is a choice that you're actively making, and this ability that you actually have moment to moment to buy into, to choose, or let other people choose. I think that's that gift of, again, and I think if we talked about, we tend to do that subconsciously the way our parents gave it to us. You know, we do it the way we've been taught that. It's the language that we speak, just like we're speaking English now. It's something we were taught, you know? But we don't have to parent ourselves the way our parents did. And if we're not actively choosing identity in that way, most likely somewhere along the line, something else is defining it. So I think it's that. I think if we're choosing first and foremost who we are in an identity place, I think then, Matt, to kind of your point, we're free then to be vulnerable in that way, to say, how that hurt, right? We're stronger and more capable in that moment to actually be able to risk how we feel, because again, that person's opinion isn't telling us who we are. Now, they still impact us. We still want to be loved. We still want to choose to be able to feel cared for, and it feels good, right, when we're in connection and companionship in healthy ways. But I think it's that place of identity that I think it can be a sticking point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, when Matt, you shared that, you know, you're exhausted after counseling. I'm exhausted, so I'm going to cut it off here because I have all these notes to like think about myself. So thank you so much, Jeremiah. So I'm going to let it open to the two of you. Is there something you want to end with, some advice that either of you can give? Matt, from your experience in counseling, and obviously Jeremiah, from your experience counseling, if you want to end up with that last takeaway for our listeners. Matt, you first.
I think two things stood out from earlier in the conversation when Jeremiah stressed, and we keep coming back to the work it is to mind your mind, and how it takes us intentional engagement in that. I think it's very much like when someone else says something to you and you decide if you're going to engage and say something back or not. It's truly that same practice within ourselves, where it's probably good to ignore some, I would say, maybe, but if you're seeing that pattern, well, then you know you have to confront yourself, and that's just a very interesting work. The second thing is, I think if we were to really look at that Proverbs 18:21 verse, the tongue has the power of life and death. Emily Dickinson, I always quote her because she's the only poem I remember from high school, when she said, "A word is dead when it is said, some say, but I say it just begins to live that day." And that adage of, I can say these words and they're gone as soon as they leave. Like, word is dead when it is said, but I say it just begins to live that day. To think that every word we say, we can't control the impact that it has, and it either can bring life or death. Very few are neutral. And that's in a culture that just spits out what we think or type our gut reaction with a bad filter. That's a lot of potential damage. And so to literally think through, is this sentence, is this word going to be helpful or hurtful? Oh, that was our language in youth ministry days, helping or hurting. But it's true. And it takes a lot of, I believe, this is something we're going to crack on our, be able to solve on our own. It'll be inviting God into that space and helping us inventory not only the words we're allowing in, but the words that are going out. Yeah. And that's just very important.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. That's really good. Yeah, I think if there's anything I would kind of just say that I still reflect on often, I think is one of those things to tune back into on the daily. I think just trying to claim that territory that you are yours to define and you're yours to take care of. And that your own caregivers originally taught you how, but to see that as just the starting point, to see the covers, the way they cared for you is just the launch point, and try to take the good and be released from the bad, and to try to expand on, just like we expand on all the other things in life. We learn so many other things throughout our lives, right? And to kind of see the childhood and all that developmental stuff is just a launch point. And self-parenting can be that too. It's not this fixed idea from the past about who you are, but you're a person that you're in charge to grow and to nurture. You're yours to care for. So as you self-soothe, as you see your value in the relationships, as you take risks in the relationships, can I go back to that starting point we talked about earlier, that connecting to that you're safe and secure, that you're loved and valuable, that you're strong and capable, to offer yourself that continually, that it's not something it's something you have to fill your tank with consistently, that we all need. So yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask one other question just regarding this. So there's obviously an intellectual assent that yes, I should do these things. And then when do you know it's good for someone to seek out a counselor? Like, obviously I'm a firm believer in counseling. When would you say, okay, you've been trying this enough on your own, now it's time to get some help? Where would you help someone define when that is or occurs?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if there's obviously an area of life that you felt really stuck in, or Diane, like you mentioned, if there's some of those symptoms that feel like you're really stuck in, if there's depression, if there's anxiety, some of those things that you feel like you're just really stuck in and you can't pull out of on your own, I think it's a great time to kind of check in, to find somebody just to be able to talk to and say, I kind of want to go in, I want to make sense of these kind of things. Counseling can look like a lot of different things, and I think everybody kind of has their own style of doing it. But to find somebody safe to unpack and talk through life with, I think is never a bad thing. But I think especially if you don't have that in your community and your family system or your friend group, I think having a person to maybe unpack with, it could be a good move with that. But I think you don't. It's not a. I don't think it's necessarily a have to. As we talk through those kind of things, I don't think it's for every season of life. But I think if you have some areas you want to grow in, and you feel like you're not necessarily overcoming in some of these big key areas, or you're having some of those symptoms that you feel like they're really holding you back, I think that it's always a great place to check in to say, maybe I need some assistance. It's that old adage that, if you want to go, fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go together. So we all need each other. We need each other in so many different forms to be able to kind of help each other, to bear witness to each other, to care for each other, and to help carry the burden. So, yeah.
Great. Wow, that's great advice. Thank you so much. I just don't even know how to close this because I want to talk for another hour, but I as I said, I'm exhausted just thinking about all of this. So thank you so much, Jeremiah, for joining us. I know that there's more than just a couple pearls here that I think will really help the listeners, even if they aren't in the place where they need to come to a counselor. Just those fine tuning and accepting some things that you pointed out are just, minding our minds, taking care of ourselves. So that is awesome. So for all the listeners, we'll have some resources just below what you're watching. We'll list some resources to help you go further on this journey that you're on. And if there's anything else that we can do for you, any direction that we can give you in this area, we are here at Experience to help with those questions of your faith and your spirituality and all those things that maybe you haven't found somewhere else. And we welcome you to come along with us on our journey. So thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next week.